Hello and welcome to this eCampus News webinar on the Bookstore of the Future, What Students Want, What Schools Need. My name is Dennis Pierce and I'll be moderating this event. I'm the former editor of eCampus News and I'm now a freelance education writer and consultant, and I'm excited to have you join us for what should be a very informative session. Today's webinar is sponsored by Ambassador Education Solutions, which connects students with course materials in meaningful and effective ways, driving down costs and improving outcomes. Before I introduce our presenter, I'd like to take a minute to go over some of the features of the platform that we're using for this webinar. Today's event will be recorded, so you don't have to worry about missing anything. Within a few days, you'll receive an email message that contains a link to this recorded webinar along with the PDF of the slides. You can submit questions at any time during the presentation by clicking on the purple Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, typing your question into the pop-up box and hitting submit. We'll save those questions for a Q&A session with our presenter at the end of the webinar. We also have a group chat function that you can launch by clicking on the blue chat button at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to use this feature to chat among yourselves or to contact someone from the eCampus News team if you have a technical question, but please don't use this feature to ask questions of our speaker. If you have a question for Bruce, you can use the Q&A box that I just mentioned. If you find that you're having a hard time reading the text on the slides, you can enlarge that portion of your screen by clicking on the box in the upper right-hand corner of the slide window, or you can click on the double arrows for a full screen view of the slide presentation. And finally, we encourage you to join the back channel conversation on Twitter by referring to the Twitter handle @ambassador_ed and the hashtag ECNwebinar in your tweets. Ambassador has made a few resources available for you to download as well. You can find links to these materials in the additional resources box on the left side of your screen. So with these housekeeping items out of the way, let's get started with our presentation. Our speaker today is Bruce Schneider, Vice President of Business Engineering for Ambassador. Bruce has more than 20 years of experience developing, delivering, and managing business technology solutions. He has helped organizations integrate solutions that allow them to operate more effectively and efficiently. Bruce has spent more than a decade in the technology group at Ambassador, where he leads the development of its integrated bookstore service solutions and helps colleges and universities improve the quality of the student experience. He's been published in eCampus News, EDUCAUSE Review, and other publications. At this time, I'm going to turn things over to Bruce.
Thank you, Dennis. Appreciate it. And thank you all for joining us today. We'll discuss the results of our review of surveys, studies, and other research material that looked at students, schools, bookstores, and course material trends. From that research and from our own experience serving schools large and small across the sectors of higher education, we will share what students want, what schools need, and what we believe is the bookstore of the future. We're going to try to answer 4 primary questions. How do today's students think, feel, and behave? What do today's students want and need relating to course materials? How are schools responding through innovative bookstore and inclusive access models? And how can students stay ahead of the change curve? Students today are not the students of 10 to 20 years ago. They've been affected by the rapid changes to our world, as we all have, and we may not have kept up as educators. We'll take a big picture look at the gap between how students feel, behave, and think, and how schools think of their students. As an aside, for those of us who are parents, it's much like the gap we see when we try to understand our own kids today. We'll look at how student expectations have changed. We're going to look at the factors of student demographics, student finances, and behaviors that directly impact how students feel about their school experience, and more directly, how they interact with and what they need as it relates to course materials, the bookstore, and support. We will also look into trends in course materials, fulfillment methods, the digital transition, and a course material program methodology called inclusive access as means to better support students and bridge the gap between what students want and what they often get today. Understanding how students think, feel, and behave starts by looking at who they are. Taking a look at student demographics, we see students today are different than they were in years past. Students today don't fit the traditional profile we've always known. Today, 37% of college students are 25 years or older, and 46% of college students are first-generation college attendees. Balancing school, work, and family responsibilities is also quite difficult. 64% of college students work, and 40% of them work full-time. 49% of college students are financially independent from their parents. 24% have children or other dependents of their own. And 57% live independently away from parents or campus housing. Retention and completion results speak for themselves. And a recent study shows that out of 100 bachelor degree students, 35 graduate and work in a job requiring a bachelor degree. 28 graduate but are underemployed. 3 earn an associate's degree. 12 are enrolled beyond 4 years, sometimes as many as 6 or more. And 22 drop out. Another aspect of understanding today's students is looking at the challenges they face. Many of these challenges are financial. Looking at student finances, some things are the same as they have always been, while some are quite different. Working your way through school hasn't changed much, and many of us may agree this finding aligns with our own experiences. Though this hasn't changed much since many of us attended college, it's important to remember today's students are facing the same challenge of balancing school, homework, and a source of income. What has changed significantly is the amount of money it now costs a student to attend college, afford a place to live, an apartment or dorm room, and to eat and even have some fun. When you factor in the increase in tuition as a factor of inflation, this picture changes quite a bit. A recent analysis by Credit Karma of approximately 60 million U.S. Credit Karma members found that those with student loan debt owned an average of $33,834, almost $34,000. Credit Karma also found that it isn't just newer grads who are living with high levels of student debt. Even graduates age 43 and older were still tens of thousands of dollars in student loan debt a decade or more after completing their degrees. You may have heard that student loan debt now outpaces credit card debt as the single largest source of American indebtedness. According to Motley Fool, more than 44 million Americans have student loan debt with a total amount of $1.48 trillion with a T dollars. Other than mortgages, this is more than any other type of debt. For comparison, Americans owe just over $1 trillion on credit cards. Today's students have grown up in an online digital world. Students and technology go hand in hand. They use it to play, to be entertained, to connect with each other, to shop, to get from point A to point B. They have Siri and Alexa at their fingertips. For the most part, technology has made all our lives more convenient and customized. We are all used to an easy click or a swipe with customer-centric and immediate, seamless service. You likely know from your own experience we spend a lot of time online. Many young people no longer watch television. Rather, they get their entertainment online, often from streaming media like YouTube. From the EDUCAUSE study, we find the typical student may spend about as much time online doing homework or research as other online activities, and almost half of students reported spending between 3 and 4 hours a day working online. The typical student spends about half that amount of time, between 1 and 2 hours, on social media and streaming video. About a third of students spend less than 1 hour per day on other online activities besides working on schoolwork. The majority of students said they do not game online, but those who do game are predominantly male. In addition, students who do more homework and research online also tend to be women. These results highlight the important role connectivity plays in both students' academic work and leisure interests. But more importantly, these findings suggest that much of students' time online is spent on activities related to their coursework. As important, however, tech-aware is not the same as tech-savvy. Knowing how to find a YouTube video, navigate Twitter, Snapchat, or Facebook doesn't necessarily mean your students are capable of using a computer, a tablet, or even the software programs they may find at school. Many students say they want a tech-savvy institution, but we need to be mindful that the entire generation is not digitally literate. Although our focus is the bookstore and course materials, the broader question that frames much of our discussion is, what do students want and need from their institutions? Based on the studies, we find students today expect a personalized experience, rapport with faculty and staff, and support, factors which cannot be overstated. 98% of students said the teaching methods and characteristics of their instructors had a significant effect on their motivation and learning. I'm sure that's not a surprise to anyone. The current generation of students, though, has a dynamic style of learning, as they do not prefer being passive receivers of information. They require more immersion and engagement with their learning environment. Modern students consume digital media on a large scale and interact mostly through online messaging as opposed to face-to-face communication. Learning for them is not limited to attending classes or going to school. They have access to webinars, presentations, and online classes, for example. Modern students are looking for a curriculum that is comprehensive and exhaustive. Given the extremely demanding job market today, students expect a curriculum that will equip and empower them intellectually. Focusing our attention on the college experience, we saw from the research that today's students face significant hurdles along the way to getting an education, and a few of them are on this slide. According to the Department of Education, U.S. colleges expected a total of 20.4 million students in fall of 17, about 5.1 million more than in fall of 2000. College tuition has more than doubled since the 80s. No surprise, I'm sure. From the late 80s to the 2017-18 school year, the cost of an undergraduate degree rose by 213% at public schools, adjusting for inflation. And that's after adjusting for inflation. Back then, in the 1980s, the average annual tuition for public college was just under $1,500, or $3,190 in today's dollars, compared with today's price tag of almost $10,000. Private college tuitions witnessed a cost increase also. In the late 80s, it cost $7,000, or $15,160 in today's dollars, for a private undergraduate degree. Today, that same private undergraduate degree, the average cost is $34,740, quite an increase. You may be surprised to learn, however, that compared to 30 years ago, textbooks are 812% costlier. A single textbook can cost up to $300, and the average college student is expected to spend more than $1,200 on textbooks annually. And in the 2017-18 academic year, an additional $612 was spent on technology and school supplies, $106 more than the previous academic year. Very interestingly is that 85% of students said textbooks and course materials are more stressful than housing, healthcare, meals, and food. As a result, there are a number of changes. Electronic textbooks are on the rise, and it's estimated by the Huffington Post that they could save students as much as $1.4 billion collectively a year. That's not an option students had in years past. Electronic books, learning management systems, online learning, and school-provided devices are all examples of how technology, for at least many schools, is changing what is possible. Online course enrollment increased between the fall of 2015 and 16 school years more than it had in the past 3 years, according to U.S. News and World Report. Public colleges and universities specifically saw a 7% increase in growth. Business Insider previously reported on a survey that revealed 69% of millennials thought they learned better from technology than from people. Only 50% of respondents older than 45 felt the same about learning with technology. Perhaps much of the stress students report feeling is related to the cost of education. Millennials are balancing more in addition to their schoolwork. According to a study by the Center for Education and the Workforce at Georgetown University, 70 to 80% of students have a job while attending school. 40% of them work more than 30 hours a week, exceeding the 15-hour-a-week cap that many say they should maintain without hurting their academics. Let's look a bit more into the stress of increased costs. We'd all like to reduce the stress of every day. And from the research we learned, students have some interesting things to say about stress. Students say stress is a big aspect of their lives and that aside from tuition, course materials are the leading financial stressor. As a result, students are often delaying the purchase of materials or not buying materials at all. Out of 85% of students who delayed or skipped buying textbooks, 92% of them said cost was the main reason for their decision. As an example of how lifestyles and education choices have been impacted by this, 4 in 10 students skipped meals. 3 in 10 decided not to take a course at all. And 2 in 10 decided to change their major to one that was less expensive. Focusing on the students' comments about textbooks and course materials, we see a number of related trends worth looking at further. Many students, 85% by some estimates, are dealing with the high cost of materials by delaying their purchase. Maybe they're playing the odds that the instructor may not use the book, or they're not buying materials at all. Delaying the purchase of or not buying materials is a trend that can have a direct impact on retention and outcomes. Most educators agree course materials matter, and if you agree that they do, then this trend is troubling. While we may not know exactly the impact this has, remember what we saw earlier, that out of 100 bachelor degree students, 35 graduate and work in a job requiring a bachelor degree. That's 35%. While the rest are either underemployed, got an associate's degree, are still enrolled after 4 years, or dropped out. Another trend we see is students who do want to buy the materials say finding them is difficult and time-consuming. From the studies and surveys, we see 70% of students surveyed consult at least 3 sources when shopping for course materials and textbooks, a confusing process that can further contribute to the delay in acquiring the materials. Many of these alternate sources are unreliable and may not even have the materials the student is paying for. Incorrect editions, photocopied materials, not to mention long delays in getting the materials are the experience of some students going out to the internet to find their books. Educators and students alike know that course materials matter. 70% of students say having materials before the first day of class would have brought them better grades. When students delay purchasing, they often fall behind in their assignments and have trouble catching up. Having the books on the first day eliminates that problem. Also of note is that many students would be interested in rolling course materials in tuition rather than it being a separate cost. What do your students want and need? When it comes to course materials, choice, convenience, support, and low cost are primary. Tying together the surveys we've reviewed and from our own work with schools of all shapes and sizes, We've come up with some general principles to improve course material availability and improve the student experience. Students prefer options, meaning print, digital, print on demand. They want to choose. Students want an easy, fast way to get support and answer to their questions. Faculty, student support staff, and bookstore staff are usually the first point of contact for student questions, but they may not always have a ready answer. A related note is that students also say they need help with software and technology. However, they are often afraid to ask, thinking that since they are the connected generation, they are expected to already know everything. That one was particularly interesting. Personalization is key, and for course materials, that that means making finding the right materials easy and convenient. Course material lists should be available to students, and best practice is to tailor the materials information to the student based on their registered courses. What can schools do to meet some of the challenges we've discussed, and how can they help students get what they want and need? When it comes to textbooks and course materials, schools need a new bookstore model. At one time, the school bookstore was the only place students could get their course materials. That's no longer true, as we've seen. Students spend a lot of time looking for the best deal online, and sometimes they find a deal that doesn't really work out for them. The school bookstore needs to compete in a digital, I want it now world with changing consumer attitudes and has to evolve to do so. Service, convenience, choice, support, and price are primary drivers of buying behaviors. School bookstores must do better in these areas or sales will continue their downward trend. We're talking today about the bookstore of the future and how schools are responding to students' requests for change. And often this response has been based on something that's called the inclusive access approach, or day one approach. Many schools, large and small, across all sectors of higher ed, have been embracing the inclusive access model to deal with the challenges we reviewed and leverage the opportunities they present. Inclusive access is a program, it's a textbook model in collaboration with top publishers, content distribution platforms, and even fulfillment service providers that supply students with all of their course materials, converts many books into digital content, and provide text materials where necessary or preferred by the students. All students buy into the content, lowering the cost for everyone. All students get access to the content on the first day, whether digital or in print. Digital materials, by the way, are often considered a rental item, and they're available in a range of license durations. However, many publishers offer perpetual license durations. The inclusive aspect of the model means that every student has the same materials, whether print or digital, on the first day of class, with the charge included as part of their tuition. Inclusive access is a simple way for institutions to bring down the cost of college attendance and ensure all students have all materials on the first day of class. Inclusive access delivery models break the cycle of high material cost by consolidating purchases to achieve lower prices for your school and students. For faculty or former faculty listening to today's webinar, inclusive access means no more wondering which students won't do the reading and homework assignments because they don't have the book. For administrators, inclusive access means providing your student every opportunity for success. How does it work? Campus stores are often the ones driving inclusive access initiatives, and they receive a cut of the sales. While the profit margins may be smaller, inclusive access means the stores receive revenue from a larger number of customers, and the lower margins are mitigated by lower overheads. Many campus stores retain school merchandise items and supplies and leverage fulfillment service partners to manage the course materials program. This arrangement is often referred to as a hybrid bookstore. There's a link in the additional resources area to white papers on this topic. Inclusion of course materials in tuition, resource fees, or technology fees are tools the schools have to make sure all students have access to their books before the first day of class. Opt-out is a requirement of the DOE for inclusive access programs, and in our experience, though we see that opt-out rates are usually quite small, less than 1% often, with half of those students opting back in when they realize they can't get the materials less expensively elsewhere. Inclusive access programs provide students with accessibility, convenience, affordability, and for schools and their faculty, they deliver proven results. Let's look a little further into what students and faculty have to say about how having materials in time for the start of class is impacting their experience. We're also going to look at how schools have leveraged this model and some of the great results they've achieved. Students and faculty alike appreciate the convenience of having all of their print and digital materials ready to go for the first day of class. No more searching, buying the wrong textbook, or delayed deliveries. The print-on-demand options also offer students with digital textbooks a low-cost means of keeping their materials in print form. For faculty members, a key selling point of the inclusive access model is that students can begin homework assignments and study right away. Some of the other benefits to faculty: no restraint on academic freedom. Faculty still choose the content for their classes. Faculty has the ability to manage content and even add in their own in some platforms. The ability of digital course materials to integrate in the campus LMS for single sign-on access and gradebook integration give faculty additional tools and a more streamlined process. Instructor analytics on student engagement with digital materials allow faculty to quickly identify students needing additional support and guidance. Some examples of how this has worked out for schools, big and small. Indiana University, for example, began their inclusive access pilot in 2009, and the program has continued to grow since then. The goals of the program sound a lot like many of the things we've seen from the studies: reduce costs, offer materials of choice, enable new tools, and create more sustainable models. Primary takeaways from that program's early days were that, yes, students saved a lot of money, and faculty and students prefer the day one access, and better engagement with materials has led to better outcomes. Their experience has been summarized in this link below. It's a document they've put together, a PDF that you can download, and contains many of the benefits and can be a blueprint for your own inclusive access program. Likewise, the information available from UC Davis is the blueprint for a successful inclusive access program. Again, as expected, students saved a lot of money. Students' course materials were available on day one, and no waiting in line for heavy books anymore. And once again, the school found that increased interaction with course content led to greater success in the courses. Take a look at another school that's used inclusive access successfully. The inclusive access program at Rowan Cabarrus started in fall of 14, and compared with fall of 13, the retention rate among students in all developmental reading and English sections was 90%, an 18% jump. And in much of the literature that is available online, if you do your own searches, you'll find similar results from schools all across the spectrum. This is no longer becoming an unexpected result. Schools are expecting these type of results from inclusive access programs and first day access to materials for all students. And by the way, one of the other things they saw was that 84% of the 88 students who completed the course in spring of 2015 achieved a final score of 80% or better, which was an improvement over previous years. One of the takeaways from successful inclusive access programs is they leverage existing systems and integrate those systems wherever possible. This streamlines processes, saves time, reduces keying errors, and when tied to analytics, can deliver key insights and intelligence to manage, measure, and improve your programs and outcomes. As an aside, engagement apps and defined purpose apps such as QTrack, a small package tracking system, for example, can be used to provide even more convenience for your students and can provide useful information to evaluate the effectiveness of your course material programs and communication plans. If you are working with a fulfillment service partner, leveraging their system integration experience can extend the capabilities of your internal IT resources and accomplish things you otherwise might not be able to. Anyone who has been to business school has heard that if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Proper management requires data and proper analysis. With both, you have the tools to save time, effort, and money and drive more effective use of resources. Analytics based on data from material fulfillment processes can improve the program even more over time, save time and money, and help drive better outcomes. As we saw earlier, instructor analytics on student engagement can allow your faculty to quickly identify students needing additional support and guidance. That can directly, in fact, impact retention positively and outcomes as well. Some practical recommendations for controlling costs and operational expenses are leveraging technology, publisher relationships, and transparency. When all students buy into materials, the cost for all can be reduced. Informed decisions are better decisions. By providing faculty with cost of material information, they can still have academic freedom while being mindful of the costs. Controlling student price of materials gives the school the ability to pass along these cost savings directly to their students. If the benefits of inclusive access programs seem hard to achieve, given existing workload and staff limitations at your schools, perhaps consider a fulfillment services partner who knows these programs and how to make them work for your school. We've seen inclusive access programs can provide students with what they need, convenience, lower cost, and their cost material expenses rolled in tuition rather than out of pocket, along with first day access to all materials. For faculty, day one access to all materials for all students, academic freedom, a say in student material costs, the ability to share their own content and track student engagement, add new tools and bring new learning opportunities. Schools must take charge of their course material programs if they want to improve retention and outcomes, and inclusive access programs delivered through the bookstore of the future are the way to do that. Staying ahead of the change curve requires communication, transparency, and involvement of your students, faculty, and leadership teams. These things are key to identify new trends, issues, concerns, and areas for improvement. If not already a focus area, make continuous improvement an agenda item for your next leadership team meeting and decide what that means for your school. As we've seen, students have changed. They're harder to reach. They demand personalization and support throughout the school experience. Some people call that the Amazon effect. Remember, the student is the customer. And if you can't provide them the support, ease, convenience, and access to learning materials and education they want and need, they may not stay your customer. As your school, students, programs, and subject matter change, so should your course material and student support programs. Continuous process improvement, communication, feedback from faculty, staff, and students are vital as you consider improvements to your existing course material program and perhaps consider an inclusive access program for your school and students. The bookstore of the future provides better value and services for your students. It's smart, flexible, adaptive, and integrates seamlessly with your school's systems and processes. Thank you all for your time and attention, and we'll take some questions.
Thanks, Bruce. Yeah, you've given participants a lot to think about. I'd like to remind everybody that if you have a question for Bruce, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen now. I'm going to kick off the question portion of the webinar with just a question about what Ambassador's role in everything you've just described is.
We're a fulfillment services partner, and we're very proud of the schools that we get a chance to work with. So that is something that we want everyone to know. So we do have a vested interest in letting you know about inclusive access, but many schools do it on their own. They don't have to use a partner. What using a partner can do, though, is make the process faster, easier, and avoid some of the cow pies along the way.
Okay, great. Somebody asked, or somebody wrote, we agree that bookstores must provide choices. We provide print, digital, inclusive access, etc. We found that with many options, we're confusing students. Any suggestions?
Yeah, so students listen to their teachers most often, and they're the ones they go to for advice most of the time. What I would suggest is that your teachers take a very active role in recommending to students what they should get. It's also important to have a communication plan for your students so that they know from the beginning their choices, what they are, and you might even consider some user guides, some information for the students that help them make that choice before they even go to the bookstore or are presented with the decision.
Okay. What happens to the bookstore itself if a school moves to inclusive access, and can students still get everything they need?
Sure. So students can always get everything they need, and the school has a lot of choices for the way to utilize an existing bookstore. Some schools decide to make the footprint of the existing bookstore smaller, move the books out, make online options available or automatic fulfillment options available for course materials, leave supplies, logo wear merchandise at the store, and for textbooks actually have them delivered to the school, pre-boxed by students so it's easy for the students to pick them up. It gives the store another opportunity to increase traffic by having the textbooks delivered to the school, pre-boxed by student, ready to go, and the students come there, pick it up, and they see the other merchandise as well. So schools have taken a lot of different approaches to that. Some have decided to close their bookstore entirely and make all the merchandise and logo wear also available online to their students.
Okay. Somebody wrote, I'm familiar with publisher-specific subscription models. Are there subscription models that allow colleges to use more than one publisher?
So subscription models today are usually limited to publishers and publisher-specific. The one that I think of most often is our integration with Cengage for Cengage Unlimited. There are other subscription models. Typically, they're found with library-sourced materials. There are subscription models for video content, for example. We work with a group that produces videos for criminal justice programs, and the student is sold a subscription, kind of an all-you-can-eat buffet if you want. Those are just some of the examples of subscription models. I'm not aware of any subscription models that look at all publishers across the board, but what is similar to that is when schools take a look at their programmatic cost of materials, divide that out by the number of courses, and use that to come up with a course fee or technology fee all students pay for all their courses. That's the closest thing I can think of to a subscription model where the school is actually managing it internally.
Okay. Somebody wrote, we've only offered new textbooks, a few used textbooks, but not a textbook rental program. Students complain often about book prices. Is a rental program still a good idea?
A rental program can be a good idea, but usually what we do is we recommend to our clients to think of two potential alternatives, because rental programs have one major drawback. The student often doesn't return the book, and the school or the student ends up paying the full price of the book. A used book option gives the student the ability to decide if they want to keep it or return it, and maybe get a buyback amount that may be reducing their overall cost for that used book. That's one option for schools, to use the used book option and then buy back that book for students. A second option is to consider digital programs where the digital is really a rental and use that as the rental option. These are just different ways to go. If you want the rental option, there's good rental options too, but bear in mind, students quite often hold the school responsible when their credit card has been hit for the full cost of the book they forgot to return. Whereas with a used book program, if they don't return it, no harm, no foul, they've already paid for it in full.
Okay, thanks. How do you fairly determine a fee when there are courses that may not use textbooks but use other learning materials? Is one fee pricing system fair?
Well, that's not really a question for me. That's for your leadership team to decide. So you may find that there are certain courses where you don't want to charge a fee because there are no materials and it wouldn't make sense to do so. So you might carve that out of your consideration for what that overall programmatic per course fee might be. So that really is the decision for your leadership team. And if I was a student and there were no books used in a course, no materials at all, and I still had to pay a materials fee, I find that a little troublesome. I agree with you.
Okay. Someone wrote, our student account folks would rather charge students in advance at the time of course registration and then process a refund for inclusive access if they opt out. I'm concerned how this might affect students even trying the inclusive access materials because they may opt out in advance at registration time. Any thoughts on the decision dynamics of students regarding when the invoicing and opt-out times are varied?
Sure. So schools do it both ways. The first one is really an opt-out at registration time. The second is an opt-out after the fact. If you opt out after the fact, it does allow you to invoice and honestly recognize the revenue right away. Then students that have opted out, that information is passed back to the school so that you can make the determination about what gets returned to the student and when. We even have some schools that ask us to calculate sales tax on that return item just to make certain that fully in compliance with all the laws and even sales tax. If you opt out, if you offer students opt out on both directions, that becomes much more difficult. However, what it means is if a student opts out in the beginning, you wouldn't fulfill materials for them at all, so there would be no need to invoice them and refund money to them. However, if you're doing it yourself, then that means building a program that identifies students who have opted out in advance so they're not invoiced for that fee, and then students who have opted out after the fact so the fee can be returned. It gets more complicated to do it on both ends. Most schools do it one way or the other, with the majority of them doing it after the fact.
Okay. How do most schools charge books and supplies on ledger cards with inclusive access? Is everything included in tuition? And if so, how do books fit into your refund calculation policy?
So refund is just like a return is just like an opt-out. If a student drops a class, it's just like an opt-out. It's just a different source for the same action where the material fee, if you're doing a fee, gets returned to the student. If you're charging the student by item, that item cost gets returned to the student. With ledger cards, there's often a data fee that goes back to the school, so the school can charge the student's ledger card appropriately. Just as an example, I don't mean to talk about us too much. We even have schools that ask us to apply ledger card codes to the transaction so we can split it up by material, shipping, and tax. There's lots of ways to do that. If a resource fee is not lumped into tuition, if it is lumped into tuition, then it becomes part of tuition. If you're doing it as part of tuition and not a separate fee, then you have to establish a protocol by which students might receive money back for things they cancel out of.
Okay. How do you see colleges and universities rolling this out with their classes typically? Are they doing this like a first-year pilot program, or what are you seeing with that?
We always recommend going slow and taking about 1.5 to 2 years to roll this out. Typically, there's a pilot program. One of the things that is extremely important, actually two of the things that are extremely important for a successful transition to this is to involve your IT department and involve the instructors. If your inclusive access program is going to include digital materials, then that's absolutely mandatory. Many of the inclusive access programs are digitally based because that's where you get the biggest bang for your buck in terms of cost savings. In those instances, the IT department needs to be involved so that they can make appropriate adjustments and improvements to the school's internet infrastructure where necessary. It's not a huge amount, but it's still something to be considered, the amount of increase that usage of digital materials will cause for the infrastructure for the internet. The second thing is the instructors. Not all instructors, just like not all students, are technically savvy. They're going to need time before any of your students touch digital books to touch it, to try it, to be involved with it From our own experience, we spend a great deal of time training the teachers first. That is absolutely critical. We either do a train-the-trainer type thing, or we do regional trainings, or we do online trainings, webinars, to give teachers access to ebooks, first of all. If the school has an LMS, there's a lot of programs that allows the teachers to get access to over 60,000 ebooks right from the start, so they can try them. We recommend to the academic leadership that they make trying the ebooks a mandatory part of the teacher continuing education program, so that you then can involve teachers in a slow and steady way, with the early adopters leading the charge and the other teachers coming along with them. Usually it does start with a pilot, to answer your other part of your question, and usually the pilot is started with general education type courses where the materials, I call them read once and put on the shelf type materials, where those are things students are not going to miss. That print book, the teachers for those also need to be chosen. You wouldn't want a teacher in a gen ed course who's totally against ebooks being part of the pilot, honestly, because teachers' attitudes, about 78% of the time, students say the teacher's attitude about the ebook determines their own. So you'd want to make sure your pilot is seated with either early adoptive teachers or teachers who have received the training. They have to be comfortable, and academic leadership needs to definitely advance the charge.
That makes sense. Thanks.
Also, one
so
more
what about
factor.
Students? Oh, yeah.
Oh,
go ahead.
there's
Sorry.
one more thing I want to mention. For digital programs, when you're first rolling them out, one of the things students say is, or teachers say is, I still think students need their printed books. So that's where print on demand comes in, because when the student has the digital material, they can get a print on demand book, which is a much lower cost than the textbook, but gives them a printed version at the same time as the digital material. Thank you.
Okay. What about students who don't complete a course in one semester? How are they extended access to resources?
So that's something which is taken into account with digital materials. If you have a course or a program where the same course is used in the beginning and the end, maybe it's a 1-year or 2-year program, same material is needed at the beginning or end, that's a no-brainer. You have to get a digital license that's going to last the length of that program. For retakes, if you have a course where there's high retake rates, high failure rates, you may want to factor that in. Otherwise, you're buying that material for the student a second time. It may be cheaper, depending upon whether you're hitting a 20, 30, or even 40% retake rate, to just buy double the length of the license so that the majority of students who retake it in the following semester still have access to the content. So that's something that you can balance out. It's something, honestly, that we help our clients figure out.
Okay. You addressed inclusive access with multiple publishers a little bit before, but I think there's still some confusion around that. If a student likes an inclusive access model with a Pearson textbook, for example, they might be asking for this with McGraw-Hill or Cengage books. So just want to make sure participants are clear on how inclusive access models can work with multiple publishers.
Yeah, first of all, inclusive access models don't absolutely mean digital only. Digital is one component, and schools make the decision about what role digital plays in their inclusive access program. There's many schools who have inclusive access programs where they deliver the textbook by default to all students on the first day. So that's something also to keep in mind. So as far as other publishers, all the publishers make their material available in print and digital, and almost all of them have the availability for the print-on-demand version. Inclusive access is more a bookstore model, or more an overall model that all students can take advantage of, and it usually covers all materials for those students, unless you've decided to carve out a certain cohort of students for which a different model might work better.
Somebody asks, where can we see steps for a successful rollout as an example to show our leadership?
I would download that content from Indiana University. That was particularly helpful. That will give you that information in a great format. If you just search Indiana University Inclusive Access, you'll find links to that download, that PDF, and in there it provides a great sketch of how to build your own inclusive access program. And it's a perfect thing to bring to your leadership team. Also, if you want to call me, you can. We can help you too.
Have you seen any pushback from students or faculty to the inclusive access model, and what are their what are their main concerns, and what downsides do you see to that model?
The best example of this was a complete debacle that we saw with one of our client schools who decided they wanted to go inclusive access, and it was kind of a, hey, we're going to do this and we're going to start tomorrow. And what happened is students who were used to textbooks and getting their textbooks online suddenly had no choice. Teachers who were used to using their textbooks suddenly had to use a digital book, and there was, as you could imagine, a revolt. That's why I mentioned early on when talking about this, it takes time. It takes time to give the teachers a comfort level with materials delivered in digital form if that's what you're doing. Communication with the students, a lot of training for the support staff so that they're ready to answer student questions. We saw that the ability to answer students' questions is really critical. They don't want to have to ask twice. So training, communication, very, very important, and also gently moving into a program like this is absolutely necessary. If you look at the stuff from Indiana University, the stuff from UC Davis, you'll see they started small. Same thing with Rowan Cabarrus, same thing with the programs that we put together for our clients. You start small and go from there and build and learn as you go.
You mentioned that inclusive access can reduce costs because of the volume purchase aspect. Do you have a sense for any kind of a percentage reduction that schools are seeing in the cost of course materials compared to the traditional textbook or digital ebooks access model?
Yeah, so one of the examples I use when I do presentations is one of our schools is now at $31.76 per item delivered to their students. 4 years ago, when they were all textbooks, it was $80. So there's an example of what they've done. They still have textbooks. There are still students who prefer the textbook. They have accommodation programs. There are some courses where textbooks are preferred, especially for medical. ICD-10, you're not going to do that as a digital book, although you can, but that's an example of some of those materials that really don't translate well into digital format and schools keep as textbooks.
And somebody asked about what about specialized courses? Are all materials, digital and traditional textbooks, available for any course through an inclusive model, or might schools run into some problems with certain materials not being available through that model?
Yeah, so never say never and never say all and always. So yes, there's always going to be problems. I just said always. But that way I'm willing to use that always. There's always going to be something you find. There are boutique publishers, small publishers. There's content that's not available. However, there are usually options to that. There's either replacement materials or some way to work and coerce or talk to the publisher or the author about making their content into digital form. Quite often it's the authors that have some hesitation, and working with them we found can be very, very successful. Sometimes publishers have special pricing arrangements, and they think that a digital program or an inclusive access program is going to break the rules that they have for pricing. We've worked with them too successfully. So there will be some troubles, there will be some difficulties like anything else, but they are surmountable.
Okay, great. Somebody asked about, do you have a sample RFP or other guidance that schools can use to move to an online bookstore model?
Well, I can tell you, no, we've certainly answered lots of RFPs for this, and there probably are examples online available for you, but what I can tell you is I would be very happy to reach out to you and speak about some of the things that we typically see. Sometimes we're even interviewed by schools as they build their RFP, so we can tell them the things that they need to include or make sure to include, just to make sure there's a level playing field for everyone who's going to respond and that their questions really address the important points. Happy to do so. I don't know what the ability is for folks to reach out to me, but you can always go to our website, www.ambassadored.com, use the Contact Us page, and that'll make its way to me, and we'd be happy to get back to you.
Okay. Thanks. I see that our time is getting close to being up, so I'm going to wrap things up on that note. If anybody submitted a question that we did not get to in this Q&A portion, somebody from Ambassador will follow up with you directly. And if you have any other thoughts or questions about anything you heard today, I'd encourage you to reach out to Bruce or someone else from Ambassador using the contact information that Bruce just mentioned. It's also in that final slide. I'd like to thank Bruce Schneider, our speaker today, for a very informative presentation. And I'd like to thank all of the audience members for joining us as well. Hopefully you gained some useful insights that will help you rethink how you approach your campus bookstore to improve the student experience. As a reminder, you'll get an email within the next few days that contains a link to this recording along with the slides. And if you haven't already done so, please also take a minute to download those additional resources that Ambassador has provided in the left-hand portion of your screen. So thanks again to everybody for participating, and have a great day.